Well, what a great controversy surrounds Ellen G. White. I mean, the mass publications the Seventh-day Adventists put out and the amount of writings that she supposedly wrote, more pages than the Bible. I mean, people either seem to love her or absolutely hate her, either circling the wagons around to defend her and shooting arrows in my direction, or others, they just want to exhume her and hang a millstone around her rotting skull. I mean, there is no middle ground. Is she a liar? A lunatic? Was she dancing with demons? What about you, Nolan? The hate mail ensued, let me tell you. I triggered a bunch of you out there with this one, didn't I? My goodness. Well, what shall I do? Shall I walk back on my liar influenced by demon statement? Well, I want to start out with some of the comments that you wrote on the last video I made about Ellen G. White. I want to start out with a zany one and then move on to some of those more stone-faced comments that I received. Let's start with a zany one. Did Bruce Jenner, yes, I said Bruce Jenner, did Bruce Jenner get pipped to the post by over 150 years? Did Alan Gerard White give Caitlyn Jenner a run for her money with Ellen G. White in the 19th century? Now, Holy Kisses commented, I have 2 antique copies of Ellen G. White's original 1882 early writings, unedited. They include heresy after heresy, blasphemy after blasphemy, until I almost vomited, she says. And I had to set the book down repeatedly. The Seventh-day Adventist Church grew out of religious fanatics. Grandchildren of the Salem witch trials, only 50 miles away from which Ellen G. White was born. Seances, mesmerism, necromancy, mysticism, rappings and trances. Etchings show the early church members, including EGW, on the floor, crawling around, kissing each other. Some of the women were frustrated that not all the men wanted to kiss them in the trance. There's an etching of this. Now, Ellen G. White could not write. She struggled to read aloud a written or prepared speech. Her works were written by a few literary secretaries. Most of her early works were acts of plagiarism against H.L. Hastings, whom won a copyright lawsuit. A deal was struck where the Seventh-day Adventist Church would continue to publish Steps to Christ, The Great Controversy, Patriarchs and Prophets. Now, Ellen G. White freely admitted her and her husband's connections to Freemasonry. Ellen's tombstone, it has a phallus and an obelisk, and most of the churches also have an obelisk. The Seventh-day Adventist logos continue to get more and more satanic. Seventh-day Adventist high school yearbooks use the Eye of Horus and St. Peter's cross, the eye of the serpent, the 3 times wrapped tail of the serpent around the globe, the sun. The church members are ignorant, naive sheep, she goes on to say. My people perish for lack of knowledge. Once a member is knee-deep in paperwork, they will be asked to endorse the principles of the faith, which include holding the words of plagiarist Ellen G. White on par with the word of Elohim. The early church funded its establishment by time stamping and date setting. The timestamping gave immediate urgency and caused panic. The date setting involved 5 separate false return dates for Messiah: 1843, spring of 1844, October of 1844, 1845, 1850, and 1851. Each time, church members signed over title to their farms. They were left with only the clothes on their back and returned crying for mercy to no avail. Other farmers failed to plant their crops for the glory of God and did suffer bankruptcy. Ellen G. White professed that Jesus was the archangel Michael, a created being, thus denying the deity of Messiah. She had a vision that Jerusalem would never be rebuilt. This has been proven wrong. There are 100 abominable errors in the first 30 pages of her 1882 early writings first edition. Now, I'm going to address this so-called first edition after we get through the comments section, so bear with me. She goes on to say this: these were radical, unstudied, unread, Satan-worshipping hirelings that were disfellowshipped from mainstream local churches who created a new gospel with flawed doctrines, revising those false beliefs after new, convenient visions. It's dog vomit. The whole of it. The whole of the history of it. Every single person who ever worked for Ellen G. White her estate, and read what was inside those locked cabinets, quit their job and left the church. Come out of her, my people. So that's one of the comments that I wanted to read to you, just to demonstrate to you this love or hate. That one was obviously a hater of Ellen G. White. Let's now read a comment from somebody that loves her. This is from Watch and Pray. He says this: I'm going to have to back up Ellen G. White reference. You went overboard, Nolan. Yes, you did. I am not going to defend her, but I am going to have to get on to you about your remarks. I have read all of her works. I take what I like and leave the rest, just like I do with you, Nolan. And when I say I take what I like, I compare and contrast it with what is written in Scripture. Anything not lining up with Scripture gets thrown out. You come across rather arrogant at times, brother, and I tolerate it for the most part. But this video you just put up makes me want to just unsubscribe due to that flaw in your character getting in the way of teaching effectively. Careful when treading on the works of others. Well, there we have a comment right there. You can see what we're up against. Now, Holy Kisses responded to Watch and Pray and says this: careful when treading on the works of others, ? Don't you know that Ellen G. White plagiarized Steps of Christ, Patriarchs and Prophets, the great controversy, and lost a copyright lawsuit? She used literary secretaries who sued the church, underpaid for being the ghostwriter of a false prophetess. Don't throw some of it out. Throw it all out and return to the Scriptures. Come out of her, my people. So you can see there's a lot of controversy surrounding EGW. I'll read you another comment, my last comment, and then I'll get into the breakdown. This is from Crystal Rose King. Brother, you have done no wrong and you must not apologize. Yes. Period. You are right in what you said. Most of the Seventh-day Adventist faith is made up by them to please them. It's not biblical. They have misunderstood the Bible, period, and many of them are demons. So you can see from the comments here, I dropped a bomb, and apparently the love and hate that surrounds Ellen G. White is still very much alive today. But I want to talk to you today about the cover-ups, the peer pressure, and that Seventh-day Adventist familiar spirit. Now, Seventh-day Adventism, it was birthed out of the Millerite movement. Now, these were the initial followers, Ellen G. White herself, one of them, of William Miller. But today, I want to focus specifically so that I can, with all clarity, either retract my statement that I made about Ellen G. White being a liar influenced by demons, or if I will reinforce that statement or add to it. I'm going to focus on 6 things specifically. Number 1, I'm going to focus on the great disappointment of 1844. Number 2, I'm going to focus on her earliest publication. It's called A Word to the Little Flock. Now this was published in 1847. This is going to be very, very telling. And number 3, I'm then going to focus on early writings, which was published in 1882 and claimed to be the first edition. But it wasn't the first edition, because the first edition was A Word to the Little Flock that was published in 1847. But you see, here's where we're going to really get to the root. What Ellen G. White wrote in 1847 gives the whole game away, and it has been covered up, and even that first edition was just erased from the memory bank. And then a later edition in 1882 called Early Writings, that was said on the preface to be the first edition. Well, that's not right. The 4th thing I'm going to be looking at today is the cleansing in the heavenly sanctuary doctrine. The 5th thing I'm going to be looking at is the shut door theory. And the 6th thing, in finality, will be her sickness and resulting visitations. Were they angels? Were they demons? So we'll start off by looking at the early doctrines and prophecies of Ellen G. White in 1844 up to 1851. They failed utterly. Utter failures. And then they were suppressed afterwards by the church and its publishers. Her earliest publication was A Word to the Little Flock, published in 1847. But Early Writings, which was published in 1882, claims this, quote, all her early writings, not a word omitted. That's what it claims. All her early writings, not a word omitted. But it's redacted again and again and again in regards to what is actually written and published in A Word to the Little Flock. Why is that? Why are you trying to hide what she prophesied in 1847? Why are you trying to wash that over? Why? Now, the preface of Early Writings in 1882 says, preface to the first edition. But like I said, the first edition is 1847, A Word to the Little Flock. So 1 is 2, 2 is really 3, and 3 is really 4, because they buried the true first edition, A Word to the Little Flock. Now, in 1844 was the great disappointment, because Ellen G. White and many, many of the Millerites had signed on that Jesus Christ would return to earth and the end would come on October the 22nd, 1844. Obviously, it didn't happen. So later, Ellen G. White changed her mind and said, well, October the 22nd was not really Jesus' return, as Miller and many of his disciples had originally thought, but it was now going to be rebranded as the start, wait for it, the start of Jesus' final work of atonement, the cleansing in the heavenly sanctuary. Because according to this new doctrine that they had to create because of the failure of 1844, they're now saying that Yahusha had been stuck in the holy place for 1844 years. And now he's finally going to get to go into the Holy of Holies and start cleansing sinners. I mean, this is blasphemy. I mean, the work of redemption finished over 1800 years before this. Remember when Yahusha was met by Mary Magdalene and she was about to touch him and he said, oh, do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father in heaven. Why? Because he was about to go up into the Holy of Holies and place his blood on the altar and complete the work of redemption, which he then did, then returned back to earth where he manifested himself to the disciples. And then, in contrast to Mary Magdalene, there was this doubting fella called Thomas. And Yahusha said, now you can stick your fingers in my side. Why? Because he had completed the work of atonement and the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary. But no, not according to Ellen G. White. He didn't actually start cleansing the sanctuary until after the Great Disappointment. So this is majorly problematic. It's actually blasphemy. Now, the holy place, she thought, was the place where you would go for forgiveness of sins only, which closed on October the 22nd, 1844. Yahusha closed up shop, and so there ended forgiveness of sins for all the world. The world, a sinner could no longer be saved after October the 22nd, 1844. Probation for sinners ended there, according to the early writings of Ellen G. White. So after 1844, Christ's work of atonement in the Holy of Holies was for the already saved only. This is the heresy of Ellen G. White, the heresy of the foundation of Seventh-day Adventism, which many good, decent Seventh-day Adventists don't know. The theory then goes on to be called the shut door theory, or probation for sinners, that ended October the 22nd, 1844. And it was taught by the Seventh-day Adventists all the way up until 1851, meaning there were no conversions whatsoever after 1844. You're done. Sorry, mate, you can't get saved. Yahusha's closed up shop in the Holy of Holies. This is just wild. Now, let's talk about her sickness. Let's talk about her visitations. Because with Elder White to encourage and back up Ellen G. White's visions, thousands upon thousands of pages were put to print. In reality, it was a result of her nervous disease. Her visitations were a result of hysteria, epilepsy, catalepsy, and ecstasy. Symptoms of these were written and in fact stated by herself and her husband in her writings, that she suffered from these conditions and had symptoms of these conditions. So Ellen G. White, quite a controversy does in fact surround her. So the question remains, shall I walk back my statement that she was a liar influenced by demons? Well, I think I will not. I will actually add to it. She was a liar, a lunatic influenced by demons. Now, many truths have come out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm not denying that, but they came out in spite of Ellen G. White, not because of her. It's time to walk away from the familiar spirit that haunts Seventh-day Adventists. It's time to walk away from the stockpile of her writings. And like our commentator said, come out of her, my people, just as it's written in the book of Revelation. You know my stance on the 66 books of the Bible. I believe they are inspired, and that's where we should be spending our time. And if we're going to look to somebody, we've got to look to our King Yahusha and him alone. It's time to stop defending her. Get out of your circled wagons and renounce the familiar Ellen G. White spirit that's been plaguing you all these years. The spirit that's been keeping you stuck in your tracks. Because the reality is, she herself is the greatest controversy ever. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel. It really does make a difference. And give us some thumbs up. Or some thumbs down if you've been hate watching us all the way to the end. You're clearly enthralled anyway. Leave some comments below, and I hope to see you live on Shabbat. Shalom.